Good afternoon and welcome to the Muskogee Creek Indian Freedmen Band's series on race relations and the Muskogee Creek Nation. Where do we go from here? I am Rhonda Grayson, one of the founding members of the Muskogee Creek Indian Freedmen Band. We are so delighted that you have joined us for our first candid conversation on this critical issue of citizenship being denied to Black Creeks, also known as Creek Freedmen descendants. These conversations are intended to educate the public about this little known history and to expose the discriminatory practice of excluding hundreds of thousands of Black Creeks from membership within the Muskogee Creek Nation. Creek Freedmen were adopted members of the Muskogee Creek Nation per the Treaty of 1866, but were disenfranchised from the tribe in 1979. Creek Freedmen were enrolled members with all the rights and privileges as the so-called by blood tribal members. Consequently, Creek Freedmen were not permitted to vote in the 1979 election, which ultimately removed the Creek Freedmen and their descendants from the tribe. Creek Freedmen represented a significant voting bloc within the Muskogee Creek Nation and understood the importance of voting. Creek Freedmen would not have shunned their responsibility in exercising their constitutional right to vote in this crucial election. This debacle of an election has compromised the legacy of the Creek Freedmen for the past 41 years and many, many generations to come. The government had a responsibility as the gatekeeper to protect the citizens of the Muskogee Creek Nation classified as Creek Freedmen from this horrendous injustice. Unfortunately, there was no protection extended to the Creek Freedmen and their descendants. Sadly, the government approved the 1979 Constitution, which eradicated the Creek Freedmen and their descendants from the Muskogee Creek Nation. The Muskogee Creek Indian Freedmen Band is a 501c3 organization, officially incorporated in 2009, but has been a dominant presence in the community fighting for the treaty rights of all Creek Freedmen for many years. We have sought to preserve and protect the unique history and culture of the Creek Freedmen. We have accomplished this mission by hosting conferences, genealogy workshops, speaking engagements, cultural events, and a traveling history exhibit to educate the public about our mission. We are the proud descendants and successors of the original Creek Freedmen. Creek Freedmen were removed from their traditional homelands in Alabama and in Georgia in the 1830s to Indian Territory, now known as the state of Oklahoma. As citizens of the Muskogee Creek Nation, Creek Freedmen received 160 acres of land. Much of the wealth and economic development in Tulsa, Oklahoma was because of the Creek Freedmen land allotments. Many of the residents affected by the 1921 race massacre were Creek Freedmen. This vital history often goes untold due to a lack of knowledge. Noteworthy, Creek Freedmen were actively involved politically in the Muskogee Creek Nation, serving in the House of Kings and in the House of Warriors, known in modern day as the House of Representatives and the Senate. Creek Freedmen served as judges, lawyers, senators, light horse policemen, interpreters, and as chiefs. One such example is Miko Kautom. He was of African, Yamasee, and Creek descent. He was an interpreter and a signer of the 1866 Creek Treaty, which included specific language in Article 2 regarding the adoption and rights of the Creek Freedmen. There were others that advocated for the protection of Creek Freedmen, such as Harry Island and Ketch Barnett. They were also interpreters and instrumental in forging the Treaty of 1866. Noteworthy, they were all Creek Freedmen or of African descent. If you believe this issue is an injustice, please reach out to the federal government, your House representatives and senators, the Muskogee Creek Nation Chief and the National Council, the NAACP, and the media to express your outrage that this injustice still exists in modern day 21st century. We ask that you boycott the Creek Nation Casino and all businesses that conduct business with the Muskogee Creek Nation of Oklahoma until this injustice is made whole. Reach out to those businesses and express your disappointment and outrage. If you are interested in joining the fight to restore citizenship to the Creek Freedmen descendants or would like to join the Muskogee Creek Indian Freedmen Band as a member or supporter, please reach out to us at mcifb@1866creekfreedmen.com or visit our website at www.1866creekfreedmen.com. We are also on Facebook. Okay, so one thing that we want to point out is that we did invite the Chief Hill and Second Chief Beaver and all 16 members of the National Council to join us on this meeting call. We also sent the Chief one of our lapel pins as a peace offering. So what we're hoping is that maybe in the future, we will have some future dialogues with the Muskogee Creek Nation on this important issue of citizenship. Now, secondly, we want to thank the panel for joining us in this important discussion on race relations and the Creek Nation as it pertains to the disenfranchised Creek freedmen. We ask that each panelist introduce yourself and speak from your viewpoint regarding the disenfranchised Black Creeks who were granted citizenship based on the 1866 Treaty, Article 2. Does the Muskogee Creek Nation have a sovereign right to exclude Black Creeks and their descendants that were a part of the tribe prior to the Removal Act? Is sovereignty really sovereignty? So we'll start with Demario.
All right, I'm attorney Demario Solomon Simmons. I am designated as a Creek freedman. My heritage goes back to the old country, so to speak, with my ancestor Cal Tom, who's first shows up in history in the early 1800s. Obviously, he came here in the Trail of Tears. He was an important figure in the Creek Nation before the Civil War. And during the Civil War, he was elevated to Minko, or chief. After the Civil War, he negotiated and signed the Treaty of 1866, which includes Article 2, as Rhonda just stated, which granted freedom for all enslaved Africans within the Creek Nation at the time. My heritage also goes back to the Perryman clan, which is a very famous name in the Creek Nation. So Creek all the way through. I've been working on Creek issues and legal issues since 2002, really trying to push the Creek Nation to stop its anti-Black racism. The question that you asked, Rhonda, just off the top, does sovereignty give them a right to exclude Black Creeks? I say absolutely not. They are violating not only the Creek Treaty of 1866, but they're violating the 13th Amendment, which states that there should not be any badges of slavery. And we'll talk more about that when we get to the question and answer portion. So I'm a lawyer here based out of Tulsa, Oklahoma. I take national civil rights cases all over the nation. My motto is law is my ministry, justice my passion, and I'm excited to represent my people, the Creek Freedmen. I'm excited and proud to be Creek heritage, and I'm honored to be on this call with all the other panelists.
We would like for Jim Diamond to speak next.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for inviting me to participate.
Yes.
I'm so honored to be here and pleased to be invited and to participate. And I'll give you a little bit of my background. I'm an attorney, and I practiced law in Connecticut and New York for 25 years. I started out as an advisor to the New York State Attorney General, and then I became a Connecticut State Prosecutor, a county DA for many years. And then I went on to be a criminal defense lawyer for 20 years, defending cases. I decided to do something new in 2012 and went and got a doctoral degree in Indigenous Peoples Law and Policy at the University of Arizona. They liked me. They decided to hire me as a professor. And I directed the Tribal Justice Clinic there for many years. Until very recently, I came back east, which is where I am right now, back in Connecticut. And now I'm the Dean of Academic Affairs for the National Tribal Trial College. Over the years, and while I was the director of the Tribal Justice Clinic, we worked with the Freedmen Band. We worked with some of the people here in this room,
Yes.
here in this conversation on several issues. Another thing that I've done over the years is what has troubled me in Indian country in general is this horrific epidemic of disenrollment that's been going on for the last approximately 40 years. It's about consistent with the period of Indian law and regulation of self-determination. And at about the same time, Indian tribes started throwing their own citizens off the rolls, denying them citizenship, nationality. And I found that to be objectionable. And it spread across the country, and it has spread across the country for reasons of power, for reasons of greed, for reasons of sometimes ethnic purity. I am upset with the status of the law, and I'm fighting to change the law. And in fact, I tried to get the attention of the United States Supreme Court on this issue, and I filed a Friends of the Court brief trying to impress upon them that the United States government has a responsibility to indigenous people, to ethnic minorities, to racial minorities, to protect them against abuses of civil rights and from Indian tribes themselves. And so that's what brings me to this conversation. The latest events have alerted the rest of the country to something which is not new at all to the people in this room, and that is racial discrimination. Thank you for having me here, and I'm proud to be on this panel.
Well, thank you, Jim. You've certainly been an ally and a friend to us for many, many years, and we appreciate all that you have done. So next, Dr. Lindsay Robertson. I think you're muted.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here as always. I love coming to meetings that you guys host. Always will. So just
thank you.
Asking me, I'll keep coming.
Yes.
And it's great, I have to say, to see a bunch of faces that I know, and one name, Eric. You need to turn your camera on. And it's great to see you sort of too. Eric Giles, say hi to your mom for me. I miss seeing her. Where's Cedric? He's moved around on my screen. I've got former students on here.
Oh, wonderful.
It's good to see you as well. Yeah, so I'm gonna, as law professors, I've been teaching law, some of you know, at OU since 1997. I'm sort of run the Indian law program out there. My formal title is I'm Chickasaw Nation Endowed Chair in Native American Law. I'm also a justice on the Cheyenne Arapaho Supreme Court. And I've been in this business for a long time. I'm gonna, as law professors often do, Rhonda, answer your question by choosing not to answer your question the way you asked it. Your question was, I think, does the Muskogee Creek Nation have a legal obligation to recognize freedmen citizenship based on the 1866 treaty? And I do have some thoughts on that, but I'm not going to share them. Instead, what I'm going to do is suggest a slightly different line of approach on the issue, and I'm talking mainly to DeMario here and anybody else who's litigating these. And it's there are certainly legal arguments to be made in support of the proposition that the 1866 treaty requires that the Muskogee Creek Nation currently admit freedmen to citizenship, and that's being fought out in Ron's case in the Muskogee Creek Supreme Court and has been over the years. What I'm going to suggest, though, there's a bigger issue at stake here, and that's the question: should they, out of self-interest? And the answer to that is yes, and it's not because freedmen would bring a lot to Muskogee Creek Nation, although I'm convinced that that's absolutely true. It's because, and I yelled at the Cherokees about this when they went through the disenrollment mess a while ago. And I still think, and I think I'm even more convinced that I'm right now than I did 15 years ago when I had this conversation with the Cherokees. As those of you who've taken federal Indian law know, the reason that federal Indian law exists, so this is all of Title 25 of the US Code and 25 CFR, the federal regulations, and all the stuff that tribes get, is that the Supreme Court has determined that the classification or designation Indian is not a racial classification, it's a political classification. Now, that was arguably a sketchy call when they made it. It was a decision made in a case from the mid-1970s called Morton versus Mancarry, in which a couple non-Indian employees of the Bureau of Indian Affairs office in Albuquerque said, hey, how come there's a promotional preference for Indians, but there isn't for us? And so, you know, they had applied for promotions that went to Indians as defined in the Bureau of Indian Affairs regulations. They didn't get them. These other guys got them, and they thought that they were as qualified. What the Supreme Court, and the argument was that that was race discrimination. The Supreme Court said it's not, because the designation, again, Indian is a political classification, which means it's subject to a much easier, what's called standard of review under constitutional equal protection case law. And that's what made it work. Now, where this comes out, and I'll stop talking, but can more about this later, is that what happens when tribes like Cherokee Nation or Muskogee Creek Nation or Seminole Nation disenroll people based on ancestry is that they run the risk that they're making the designation Indian look less political and more racial. And this actually caught the attention of a Texas judge in this Indian Child Welfare Act case that's going to go before the Supreme Court, where this judge who said, you know, hey, well, it looks like a racial designation to me. And if it's a racial classification, then almost all, if not all, of federal Indian law is probably unconstitutional. And these tribes can become state chartered corporations and heritage organizations, and they'll lose all of their self-governance. I've been teaching Indian law for almost 30 years now. And always the case studies for why it is a political classification were the tribes in Oklahoma who had freedmen citizens, who may have no Native ancestry. Maybe they do, but it's not essential to citizenship in the tribe. And as it became harder and harder for me to say that, my anxiety went through the roof that it was going to become harder and harder for tribes to make the argument successfully that they are political entities with citizenship that's not dependent on ancestry. And this is why if you guys were Muskogee Creek Tribal Council right now or Constitutional Convention or something, I would be yelling at you that you are taking an absolutely enormous, potentially suicidal risk here in disenrolling freedmen. And if you do a cost benefit on it, I don't care how strongly you feel about, you know, you should have Native blood. You are inviting the federal government to destroy you as a political entity. And so for the self-interest of the tribe, this is an easy question for me. And that's what I would tell them if we had this conversation. And I said this 15 years ago to the Cherokees, and I was right then. And I think I'm righter now based on this Indian Child Welfare Act decision that just came out of Texas. Thank you for letting me vent, Rhonda.
No, thank you for that. That was very informative. And as always, you know, we appreciate you and your support. So Branton Grissom is up next.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. My name is Attorney Branton Grissom. I can trace my descendancy back to Cal Tum and the Renty family. I'm a licensed minister with the Church of God in Christ. I'm a director of the Colorado River Indian Tribes Public Defender's Office. Previous to becoming a public defender, I was an associate public defender, and I also worked with the La Paz County Attorney's Office. Before that, I was a police officer. that's a little bit about my background. My stance is similar to that of Professor Robertson, but with a slightly different twist. There's three distinct issues that I have identified, and I think that they are equally important but yet distinct. The first issue being how the tribes define themselves and how the United States government and the laws define tribes. Now, when you're speaking two different languages, there is always going to be a misunderstanding. And you must understand where each party is coming from in order to get a better correlation and make communication possible. Now, the tribes are, in my opinion, have a vested interest in protecting their heritage. However, we have these terms that define what a tribe is. I can understand why the tribes have an overemphasis in tribal blood because of their vested interest in protecting their heritage. However, the tribes, in my opinion, must understand the situation that they're in. And going back to what Dr. Robertson said about the political part of this equation, is that people are a great component, numbers are a great component of politics and political power. When you disenroll the freedmen, you are essentially reducing your political power. Now, it goes back to understanding of the language and understanding the terms that we are talking about. Now, when you talk about a tribe and what a nation, what they define a nation is, I think there is a disconnect. Now, the United States is a nation made up of different peoples from different backgrounds and ethnicities. Okay, there's a set rule to become a citizen, but it's not based on blood. Heritage is protected in a different way. What way do the Muskogee Creek have to protect their heritage? That's an issue. That's an issue that must be addressed and must be taken into account when we are talking about the Creek freedmen. Now, they have a vested interest in protecting their heritage. We have a vested interest in being treated fairly. There was benefits that we provided and our numbers provided to the Creek Nation. We helped the Creek Nation to be where they are right now. And I'll talk more about it later, but that's a little bit about my stance.
Rhonda, is it okay if I jump in?
Yes.
So I want to follow up on what Branton just said about nationhood, and it goes along with your question about what is sovereignty, and I think it's a good question. What is nationhood? The Creek had inherent sovereignty. They didn't need anyone to tell them that they were a nation, but in fact, that occurred in the treaty. That's what the treaty did. The treaty created a political entity, created a nation. And I think if you want to be a sovereign, well, then you have to act like a sovereign. You should act like a sovereign. Sovereignty means protecting your people. Sovereignty means providing for your people. Sovereignty means whether that's providing economically, providing for healthcare, providing jobs, protecting civil rights, and protecting human rights. Unfortunately, Indian tribes, there is no real enforcement mechanism for guaranteeing that Indian tribes protect civil rights. There's nowhere to go. There's no remedy, and that's wrong. Racial discrimination is repugnant. The community of nations has established that through the United Nations, through the various treaties, through the Declaration on the Rights of Human Beings, the convention that restricts racial discrimination, which the United States is a party to. If you want to be a sovereign, act like a sovereign and protect people's rights. Racial discrimination is repugnant. It is offensive. Slavery is an awful stain on human history. It's an awful stain on American history, and in fact, on the Muskogee Creek's history. And all remnants of slavery must be dealt with, must be erased. And what was done to the African Creek is a remnant of slavery. It is repugnant, it is offensive. What happened in the last couple of weeks with racist murders has reminded the world of the need to eliminate racial discrimination. And it's time for the Creek Nation to join the rest of the community of nations and act like sovereigns and protect civil rights.
I would agree with that. I do want to go back to a statement that Branton made, and then we'll go to the next presenter. When you mention about the numbers, are the Creek Nation and other tribes still counting in or capitalizing on freedmen? Do you believe that?
Personally, I do think that happens. Of course, I don't have any numbers or any evidence right before me, but why wouldn't they?
Right.
Why wouldn't they?
I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry. I thought it was finished. Go ahead, Branton.
Okay.
I apologize.
Okay, and going back to numbers and just address something that Dr. Diamond mentioned. It's sometimes it can be easy to say, why don't you just do this? Why don't you just do that? We have to actually unpack some of the reasons why some things are being done. And we must give the necessary attention to those reasons. Now, when you are a people, we can't forget that we have a people that were invaded. We have a people that land was taken from them. We have a people who were disenfranchised. Okay. We have to remember that, and we have to give that the necessary respect. Sometimes we like to jump right to the here and now. Well, this is the issue here and now. Let's move forward. Let's move forward. But in order to move forward, in my opinion, you have to consider what the past has done to your current position and the psychology of that position. Now, it's easy to say, why don't you be sovereign? If you really want to be sovereign, why don't you be sovereign? Because you're working from a deficit. You're working from a deficit. When you have been invaded, when you have been disenfranchised, you're working from a disadvantaged position. And so there is a evolution that we want to occur, but that evolution takes time, and there's certain steps to that evolution. And that evolution requires an understanding. That evolution requires an understanding of where exactly you are psychologically as a people, where you are in that evolutionary process. Now, I do believe we have to understand what we are actually talking about. And when we speak on these terms of sovereignty. Now, there are different aspects of sovereignty that include taking care of the rights of your people, making sure there's somewhere to go when your people are wronged, healthcare, and such the like. However, when you're working from a disenfranchised position, all those things are not going to take place at one particular time. And what is the number one priority of a disenfranchised people? To protect who they are. We must understand that the Muskogee Creek want to protect who they are, because that's the very last thing you have to hold on to when you have been disenfranchised. We do that in different ways. And I do believe one way they did it was disenrolling the freedmen, exercising a right to do something. I don't believe it was right, but exercising sovereignty in the way that they could. Okay. Now I have better ideas of how to exercise sovereignty. I believe we all have better ideas of exercising sovereignty, but we must present why this is beneficial. Why do we take these steps, and why that step was wrong? and what consequences come from taking those steps. So a real understanding of the psychology and where we are in the evolutionary process of sovereignty must be discussed as well.
Rhonda,
Yes.
as far as your question on the numbers being utilized today by the Creek Nation, we know for a fact that the Creek Nation back in the last years of the Obama presidency, 2016, received legal settlements in the millions of dollars that was based upon violations of the treaties from the 1830s or the taking of land at that time period. And we know that there are individuals like my family who now consider freedmen, but were complete full citizens of the Creek Nation before 1866. So the Creek Nation has received money based upon land rights that my family and many other so-called Creek freedmen had in those lands, but the Creek freedmen are now not able to participate in those settlements. That is theft. That is conversion. They're taking money that should have been given to all of us and utilize it for themselves. I also like to, respond to the statement that the Creek Nation, we have to understand, why they're doing what they're doing. They're doing what they're doing because of anti-Black racism, from my perspective and my research and litigating this case for the last 50 years. Because what we see that in 1979, when they restricted the rights of Creek freedmen to even vote in the new Constitution, and they so-called kicked the freedmen out, but honestly, they really didn't do a good job of it, because in their Constitution, they stated the ways that you can prove that you were actually Creek. And you can utilize up to 30 different roles that they maintained from the 1830s to the 1890s. And if you showed yourself to have an ancestor on one of those roles, then you should be able to enroll. However, if you try to use one of those roles up until 2003, and you also had an ancestor that was on the Creek freedman roll, they automatically said no, even though their law at the time allowed you to utilize those roles. That was based on nothing but Black blood. They called it Negro ancestry. And so it's just as repugnant as the United States of America saying we couldn't be citizens because we were Black, despite what the 14th Amendment said. So I personally don't give them any benefit for why they want to be anti-Black racist. The same way I don't look at Confederate people saying, well, this is my heritage and this is why I need to have my Confederate flag up. I say, screw that 100%. Anti-Black white supremacy is wrong across the board, and that is what is practicing today.
I agree with all the points that Attorney Solomon Simmons just raised, and let me address some of them, and then I'll give some of the other folks a chance to join in. When it comes to the money that was accepted, I think you have to look at that as the bargaining that occurred in a treaty, and you receive benefits, and you also must accept then obligations of a contract, of a treaty, and that's what it is. It's a binding agreement between parties, and the Creek Nation accepted the benefits. They accepted a lot of benefits, and some of it was cash, and a lot of cash for that time. And then they, as a result, they have to accept the responsibilities that came along with that treaty. And one responsibility was accepting citizenship of the African Creek. And so you can't have it both ways. You can't say we're going to become an Indian nation with obligations and rights. We're going to accept federal protection. We're going to accept that the United States taking on the trust responsibility that they have to an Indian tribe, but we're not going to our obligations of citizenship to the African Creek. Let me talk for a second about what Demario said about that election. That election of 1979 is a sham election. It's a fraud, and it should be viewed as a fraud. And they should, and the Creek, members of the Creek Nation should be embarrassed by it.
Yes.
Humiliated by it. shamed for it. It was a sham election. If any other nation did that, they would be held to international ridicule. It's not an election when you don't let everyone vote. The federal government in this relationship that the treaty brought had an obligation to make sure that that election was fair and proper. The Indian Civil Rights Act gives them an obligation to make sure that all of the members of the nation are guaranteed equal protection and due process. When you disqualify an entire people from voting, that's not an election. Okay, that's a fraud. It was a sham election. And I don't think that the Muskogee Creek Nation has ever been held accountable for what they did in that quote unquote election and that quote unquote constitutional amendment. It was a fraud and it should be reversed. It should be addressed. It should be reversed. They should be embarrassed. They should be humiliated for what they did and held to international ridicule.
May I step in?
Certainly agree. Yes.
I just, this is a question. How are we factoring in the United States responsibility? If tribe, you can correct me if I'm off base, but aren't tribes considered trustees, tribal governments, trustees of the United States? What is the United States responsibility in this situation? And being that we have, and I use the term we loosely, more specifically, the more tenured members of the Freedmen Band and those who've been working hard for many, many years have been bringing this to the attention of the United States government through the court system. What has been done, being that if it is true, tribes are trustees of the United States government through the Bureau of Indian Affairs, what is the United States responsibility and what have they done?
That's an excellent question.
So that's a question. It's a great question, and I'll try and answer it briefly. The U.S. is the guardian / trustee for the tribes. The tribes are, as a legal matter, and have been since the 1880s, wards of the federal government with certain rights to expect that when the federal government acts in regards to tribes, that they'll actually comply with a duty of good faith and they'll act in the tribe's best interest, et cetera. What's happened in recent years, last 20, 30 years, is that the federal government has, as it's seen tribal governments become increasingly self-sufficient and sophisticated, retreated a bit from that obligation, and it's just become much harder to get the federal government to actually assume that it has a trust responsibility in any particular case, unless it's written down somewhere that for this particular purpose, they are the tribe's trustee. And so there has been a retreat, and that was true even under the Obama administration. These guys in there now, I'm not quite sure what they're doing, but even the Obama administration was very deferential when Kevin Washburn was assistant secretary to tribal governments. But the challenge, I guess, even if that weren't the case, Bren, would be that the trust responsibility runs to the federally recognized tribe and not to the freedmen, right? Or people who would like to be members. And so that means that if you ask a federal official, they would say, we are satisfying our trust responsibility. We did when we approved, Jim makes good points that this is the 79 election was certainly problematic, but Constitution was approved. The federal government says we accepted what they did, took their word that this was fair, et cetera, and that's all a part of our being respectful of tribal self-governance, tribes, and this is certainly true, get to determine their own membership, et cetera. And the courts are going to, for the most part, follow along. It would be surprising to me, although it has happened, for a court to step in and say, no, we think the tribe has to redo this. Another sort of side comment in that connection, just to respond to something that Jim said, that tribes, which I don't think he meant what I heard, but what I heard was a little unsettling, which is that there is no recourse against tribes for the protection of individual rights. I have to say, as a tribal Supreme Court justice, I would choose to take offense at that, because there actually are tribal recourses under tribal constitutional rights provisions and under the Indian Civil Rights Act, which is enforceable, as many of you know, in most, if not all, tribal courts, including Cheyenne and Arapaho Tribal Court, and we do occasionally get rights complaints and we resolve them. So, I mean, I suppose it's true that if you don't trust the tribal court system any more than you trust the tribal government, and you think they're all a bunch of crooks, then yeah, I guess maybe. But it's not clear to me that the answer would be, then let's go to the United States to get our rights protected, although I can see the arguments in that direction. And we could have a separate, much longer conversation about the international options. We're pretty deeply involved in the UN rights regime at the University of Oklahoma Law School, as Demario knows and as Cedric knows. And there are international options. They're not for direct enforcement, but they are for public relations victories. And so these are routes that tribes can take as well.
I appreciate that insight. Let me just add one more thing. Wouldn't it be problematic to absolve the United States from responsibility in this matter? I definitely can and see where you're articulating that. In recent times, there's been more of a hands-off approach because of the progression of the tribes and their self-sufficiency. However, in my experience with tribal affairs, and although it's been limited to Arizona and the Colorado River Indian tribes, I do know that when it comes down to certain things, the United States government is very active. If we're having a land issue, if we're having an issue with the casinos, if we're having an issue with enterprise, if the United States government is not, in my opinion, using a hands-off approach with this. Could it be that we're experiencing a double negative here with this particular situation, because the situation is with the African Creek population, which also has issues with the United States as well? Could that be?
Well, I answer the question like this. You know, when we filed our last suit in the DC District Court in 2018, we also sued the DOI, Department of Interior. And we were hoping that the Department of Interior would then come in on our side of the issue, but they didn't. They came in on the Creek side. So yes, they are breaching. And our argument is that the Creek Freedmen, or those who are categorized as Creek Freedmen, were Indians at the time of the 1979 Constitution. And the federal government had a fiduciary duty to protect our rights at the time, and they didn't do that. We didn't get to litigate that at all because we got remanded or dismissed without prejudice to go back into tribal court to go through the same process that we went through with Ron's case back in the mid-2000s. So Professor Robertson too, I understand what Professor Diamond is saying, there's no real recourse, because my experience in the Creek Nation court is we proved the discrimination without a doubt. And then the Creek Nation Supreme Court just kicked us out and said, you know, absolutely not. It's just not going to work here. Unfortunately, I have to go back through that process. I still do not have any confidence at all that we will get a fair hearing and a fair opportunity within that court system. But I'm going to go through it and I'm going to give it the very best shot that we can.
Yeah.
To your bigger issue of the federal government having a role in this, absolutely they do, because they created the division between the Creek and the Creek Freedmen, or the so-called Creek by blood. It was the federal government that created the Dulles roles. That's why it's so repugnant for the Creek Nation now to utilize that demarcation that the federal government created to now disenfranchise so-called Creek Freedmen. And one other thing I want to say is, when we talk about Creek Freedmen, you know, you're talking about a catch-all phrase that includes different categories of people. You know, Brandon, when you said, you know, the Creeks are trying to protect their heritage, well, I am Creek. My heritage is that heritage. You know, my grandmother, Johnny Mae Simmons, was a direct descendant of Mose Perryman. Well, because everybody knows Mose Perryman was 100% Creek, quote unquote, but he was dead at the time of enrollment. So he was not put on the Dawes roll. But her father at the time was considered a Creek freedman. So she's converted into a Creek freedman. And then in 1979, she's kicked out of the nation. So our heritage is part of the Creek Nation heritage.
Mm-hmm.
And one other thing, the Yamasee and other Black Creeks were part of the Creek Nation the time when Columbus got here. So I think it's problematic to say they're trying to protect their heritage when we are the heritage. I am Creek, period.
If I could just address Dr. Robertson's response to me. First of all, I apologize if I insulted you as a tribal court judge. I don't mean to do that. But let's face reality when it comes to these disenrollment cases that have been going on for the last 40 years. What basically and typically happens, and by the way, I was a tribal court prosecutor for an Arizona tribe. I've assisted tribes, and I think that they're obviously tribal courts, have good intentions. But when it comes to these disenrollment cases, here's what happens. Tribal councils throw out members of tribes for various reasons. Tribal courts never reverse those disenrollments. And then the federal government, the federal courts say, no, we're not going to take these cases because, in Santa Clara versus Martinez, we said it's a hands-off approach. BIA is stepping back as well. What I meant was there's nowhere to go when it comes to international law, and I don't mean to be any expert on international human rights, but tribal nations are not considered member states for purposes of UN jurisdiction or international criminal court jurisdiction or the various international conventions. So you can't go there as well. So if you can't go to the international human rights bodies, the treaty bodies that exist, the human rights courts that exist, the federal courts say, no, we're not going to intervene in this. We said that in Santa Clara versus Martinez, and we're not doing it. And the BIA is taking a hands-off approach. I haven't seen a single case where a Supreme Court of a tribal nation has reversed a disenrollment. That's why I say there's no remedy, and I think there ought to be a remedy. I think that the Creek Nation ought to be the nation, and the party and the tribal court there and the Supreme Court there ought to be the place where it gets resolved. I'm not very optimistic, and Attorney Solomon Simmons isn't either. He's going to do the best he can, and he's going to end up in federal court. And you better, and we all hope that the federal, that when it comes to that time, the federal court says racism is illegal. Period. Period. A deprivation of equal protection is illegal. Period. A deprivation of equal protection and due process is illegal. Period. In the United States, throughout the land, and that's what I'm hoping they do. Will they do it? I think it's time that they do it.
That's correct. I'm going to ask, this is great dialogue, excellent dialogue. I'm going to ask Esther Khan to join the conversation and introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Esther Kong. I'm the Director of Housing and Insurance Policy for Chairwoman Maxine Waters on her House Financial Services Committee staff. Thank you for inviting me to join you all. I cover the Native American housing programs under my jurisdiction. And actually the Freedmen issue as part of NAHASDA was one of the first issues that I cut my teeth on. So It's one that's near and dear to my heart. As you all probably know, the Congressional Black Caucus and my boss, Chairwoman Maxine Waters, have long been fighting for language that will help protect the freedmen as part of NAHASDA. We continue to fight that fight today. We've renewed negotiations with the tribes around language that would be added to a NAHASDA reauthorization. And my boss has signaled to the other members who are working on this that she will likely not agree to any sort of NAHASDA reauthorization that doesn't include some sort of language to protect the freedmen. So we're continuing to work on that language. I know we've been in touch with Rhonda about that language, as well as the freedmen of the other tribes and the other tribal leaders. So we're hopeful that we can get that language enacted into law sometime soon. And we really appreciate, all of your engagement on the issue. And this has been a really, really exciting conversation. So thanks for including me.
Certainly glad you could join. Yes. So we would like to, and we may have questions for you later, but we want to introduce the other speakers. Jasmine, are you on the line? Jasmine Gonzalez?
Yes, hi. My camera is
Jasmine.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jasmine Gonzalez. I'm enrolled in the Creek Nation. I live here in Norman, Oklahoma. Just got an interest in, local politics and issues that affect my tribe, especially. I just think it's long overdue to consider and re-enroll the freedmen back into our tribe. Thank you for including me in this conversation. It is extremely interesting. I'm really glad to be a part of it. I hope that we can all work together to get this taken care of. It's long overdue.
And Jasmine, what are some things that other enrolled citizens of the tribe can do to possibly influence the new chief, the new administration, and other members, the National Council, to do the right thing and accept the Creek Freedmen back into the tribe? What's your thoughts on that?
I mean, I think we could all be more engaged. This is the first time this has been brought to my attention because of you, Rhonda, so thank you. But I know even within my own family that if we were able to turn on the pressure with letters or calling or just constantly contacting our tribal leaders, just to bring this issue to their attention, I would hope that just increasing our engagement with them, or even organizing protests and more of a public engagement for them, would bring about their interest and their I just think that would help.
Okay, well, thank you for that. We may have more questions for you.
Can I comment?
Rhonda,
Okay.
I wanted
Yes.
to, I'm so sorry, y'all.
No, go
So
ahead.
there's questions in the chat. So I was just going to say questions in the chat are going to be answered towards the end. I'm sorry, y'all. It's just it's like a whole, I guess, revolving door of speakers. So I just wanted to thank you.
DeMario?
Yeah, I was going to say, Jasmine, I sure appreciate you joining us and being willing to help us in this endeavor. I would love to see enrolled Creek citizens, like you said, make this issue very, very public. And, we have tons of letters, but freedmen have gotten letters saying, hey, because you have Negro ancestry, you are not allowed into this nation. And the question is, are they sending those type of letters to people who have white ancestry? And the answer is absolutely not. And I think that the leaders of the Creek Nation should be shamed, as Professor Diamond stated, that this racism is repugnant, it's ridiculous, and it's a relic of the past. And they're utilizing the language and the mind state of the Plessy versus Ferguson U.S. clerks who came in and separated the nation in the very beginning and created a freedman role, a freedman designation, if you had what they consider to be a one drop of black blood. So I appreciate you being on the call, and I look forward to working with you on this issue.
Yes. Thank you for that. And now we will have Jordan Harmon speak. and introduce yourself and your position on this Creek Freedmen issue.
Hello, my name is Jordan Harmon. I am a Muskogee Creek citizen. I live in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I'm from the Deer Clan, from the Coweta tribal town. I'm also an attorney that does work in Indian law primarily. And I think that I heard your original question was, does the Creek Nation have a legal obligation to recognize the Freedmen descendants based on the 1866 treaty? And in my opinion, the law couldn't be more clear, and the treaty language couldn't be more clear that they do. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that the courts are actually going to provide that remedy, like you've heard a lot of comments about that. I think it's a really good point that some pro-Freedmen Creeks bring up a lot, that this recent Murphy case, the Creek Reservation case, Carpenter v. Murphy in the Supreme Court, which will determine whether or not the Creek Nation reservation boundaries are still intact, which has a lot of varying consequences. And the entire legal argument for the Creek Nation rested on the 1866 treaty and the reservation boundaries that were drawn by that treaty. Yes. And so if you're looking at that, I mean, if the Creek Nation is saying because the treaty explicitly states these things that they're still in effect today, then there's no way that they can argue against the treaty language in 1866. As we know, that doesn't necessarily mean that we get the conclusion we want out of the court system. I do have a lot of responses to different comments, so I wanted to see if now would be a good time to do that, or should we wait and let other people introduce themselves first?
Well, you're actually the last person, so go ahead.
Oh, great. I get the last word. Just kidding, I don't. So the first thing that because I got on a little late, so I heard somebody mentioning the disturbing trend of disenrollment in Indian country. So that's something that's true in a lot of cases, even tribes that don't have a freedmen population. Disenrolling individuals for committing crimes, disenrolling individuals who marry outside of the tribe. Those types of things are unfortunately coming out of this sort of nationalistic trend in Indian country. I really appreciate the comments from Branton and Demario. And I agree with Branton that I think in order to get Creek people to understand why this is the right side, that it's important to create the narrative that Branton is talking about. And there are, from what I'm seeing from my peers and people in my tribe, is this anti-Black racism, and a lot like what you see in the white population is this K through 12 education, this just total inundation of racism and brainwashing. And that is what Indian people go through now too, in Oklahoma especially. And that they don't know their own history at all. They don't know the history or any facts about slavery in the Creek Nation. And that as far as they're concerned, these are non-Creeks trying to get benefits from the tribe. And a lot of people that feel that way are also, unfortunately, higher blood quantum, and people who don't want to see lower blood quantum people at all in the tribe. And that educating our people is going to be, and in my opinion, the Creek citizens are the key to this issue, and that educating our people is going to be like the important thing for us to do as citizens, that, you know, this isn't about just these non-Creeks, and it's not about, a lot of people think that the US government is just trying to push all these people on the tribe. They don't want to take care of them, so they're going to make the tribe pay for it, basically. Obviously, that's coming from a place of not understanding the history. I think that it's important to create the narrative, though, and that for the Creek citizens to take it from the point of view of like, okay, slavery was introduced into the Creek tribe by the federal government well, really by the European colonizers and subsequently the American government, because it was seen as essential to the assimilation plan and ultimately removal plan, and that introducing chattel slavery to the Creek tribe would destroy traditional Indian ways of life. And in a lot of ways it did. And so then you eventually have Creek people marrying. You've got these mixed Creeks who were mixed with white that began to gain political power in the tribe thanks to the support that they had of the colonizers. And then they began to control the politics of the tribe, and they began to assist them in introducing this slave industry into the Creek tribe, which really had no place at all in tribal culture. And that even when the first slaves were introduced in the Creek tribe, there was no plantations, there was no, like, the whole lifestyle didn't even wasn't even conducive to the slave industry. So they had to completely assimilate the tribes in order to make this the industry that it became. And then in fact, there was a traditionalist, and then there was sort of the non-traditionalist faction in the tribes, and there was a whole civil war within the Creek Nation. And this hasn't been a cut and dry issue ever, and it's not now. But, yes, we're dealing with modern racism and anti-Blackness in Indigenous communities, but I still think it's important to go to Branton's point and build that narrative so that people are educated about the history. And if anything, the Creek citizens are the ones that need to be the most educated so that they can understand. Actually, discriminating against freedmen is playing into the federal government's assimilation policy. And if we actually want to protect our heritage, then re-enfranchising the freedmen would be a lot closer to getting that goal than discriminating against them would be. But they're not going to believe that unless they're educated on the history.
And I agree with you. I think education is the key. We've heard this for decades and decades that Creek freedmen descendants want to get back into the tribe because there are certain benefits received. But the reality of it is most of the Creek freedmen who are fighting these battles, we have jobs, good jobs. We've been on our jobs for years in leadership roles, management positions, working for Fortune 100 corporations. And in my 7-page statement to the Creek Nation this past fall, in my hearing, I spoke very clear about myself and other Creek freedmen descendants in terms of their careers. We have members who are doctors, lawyers. I mean,
well, and not only that, well, so that's just that's not my belief. That's
I know it's not your belief.
But also, it's not only that, it's that language is coming from a colonizer's perspective. It shouldn't matter if freedmen are doctors or janitors or unemployed. That shouldn't be what it's about at all anyways.
It shouldn't be what it's about, but the point that I'm making on this is that we don't qualify for most of the benefits that are going to be received. We already have homes and things like that. Our income is not going to qualify us for a lot of the benefits received. It is about our history and our culture and taking our rightful place back in history. People ask me oftentimes why I fight this journey. I fight for my grandmother, my great-grandmother, America Cohee Webster, who was 92 years of age in 1980. She was disenfranchised from the tribe in 1979, and that's not right. And that is why I fight. I'm not fighting for a home in Okmulgee or anywhere else. I have a home, just like the majority of the Creek freedmen from the Creek freedmen tribes, from the Creek freedmen band, and then the other tribes, Chickasaw. I'm a descendant of Chickasaw freedmen as well. Choctaw, Cherokees who, actually received their citizenship, but it is not about that for us. And I think that the majority of those individuals in the tribe, they know that, but it's the mentality, that racist mentality. And as you said, it's education, and it's going to take other Creek citizens as yourself to speak up and educate and help us. And so we appreciate you, Jordan, for joining this call.
Oh, and then
Rhonda,
one point was
Yes,
that,
Brenton.
oh,
I'm
sorry.
sorry.
first of all, thank you, Jordan.
Yes.
You've been very articulate, and I'm so enthralled by some of the points that you've made, because we must look at this from a bigger perspective than that what has been spoon-fed to us. We must look at it from the perspective of the truth. What is the truth? Although it may be problematic, although it may not be politically correct, but what is the truth? And one of those truths is, and this goes back to my point about protecting heritage, one of the truth is that African Americans, Black, quote unquote, Black people are problematic. They have been problematic with the United States and with the Creek, okay? There have been civil rights issues for hundreds of years, and even now today, specifically concerning African Americans, Black people. Why? And we must understand, we must look at it from a bigger perspective, not just from the legal lens, not just from a social perspective, but from a human perspective, and with the truth in mind. Okay, we can use legal terminology, talk about treaties here, we can talk about language there, but what does it all boil down to? The narrative. Rhonda, you talked about basically articulate a misunderstanding about, okay, what Creek Freedmen really want. Why is there a misunderstanding? Because we are not truly communicating with each other. We are assuming on multiple points, assuming what the other parties are trying to say without really actually listening to what they are saying. And going back to what I said about the problematic issue of the race relations in the United States, why would the Creek want to be associated with a problematic entity? Let's think about the truth. Why would they? When that vote took place, what was happening in the country? How does that benefit the Creek people? Even though it's wrong, there are some bigger issues that also must be looked at. And when you can look at it from a bigger perspective, that's when solutions come to the forefront. Hitting it here, there, piecemeal sort of fashion, you have to look at it from the bigger perspective. And once again, thank you, Jordan.
So I think one thing that was happening in 1979, and DeMario and others can speak on this, is that these judgment funds were being awarded because of the land that was taken. And then also during the time of the Civil War, the Loyal Creeks, my folks were on the Loyal Creek Rolls, Peter Wolf and his entire family. So we believe that they didn't want the Creek Freedmen to partake in those funds that were going to be received. DeMario?
Hey. Oh, I just wanted to interject. Is it possible? Jeff Kennedy, can I interject just for a moment?
We can hear you, Jeff. Yes.
Oh, wonderful. Great. Hey, I'm Jeff Kennedy. Yeah, it's we're looking at dockets like 277, 283, and there's about a few more. So it's somewhere in the neighborhood of about 10.5 million that they did not want to distribute. And actually, they're still looking at, I mean, it's actually come back up regarding the funding or the interest. So they know that we are entitled to those monies, but they cannot touch the principal balance. I'll yield. So DeMario, you could probably touch on that.
You have to unmute. DeMario, unmute.
Okay, I just asked him to unmute. Okay.
Okay, sorry about that. Thanks, Jeff, for that information. You know, the truth of the matter is we have the words from Claude Cox, who led the charge to disenfranchise my people.
Yes.
And his words were, "We want the freedmen out."
That's it.
Now, I'm happy to send that around to everyone. I don't even know if I can share my screen because I look at it often. It's written, his words, "We want the freedmen out."
His words.
And this is nothing but a continuation of the Confederacy within the Creek Nation who has got control. It is just like the Confederates within this nation who wants to have the Confederate flag and these monuments to these slaveholders being pushed in our face every single day. That is the truth of the matter. And so we do need to educate people of good faith like Jordan and Jasmine who are on the phone, who are Creek citizens who are saying this is wrong. But we're not going to absolve them and give them, I'm not going to absolve them, the Creek Nation, and give them any pass for their 100% anti-Black white supremacy, period. When we saw in 1877, when the Creek chief at the time had to tell certain Confederate members of the Creek Nation, you need to stop treating these freedmen, these are our people, you need to give them their full rights. He was talking to these Confederates within his nation. And they need to be eradicated from political power in the United States of America, in the Creek Nation, and throughout this world. And that's what the whole movement that George Floyd's murder has started, is that people are saying no more. When we say Black Lives Matter, it is not just with police violence. It is on our jobs. It is in housing. It is in employment. And it's in the Creek Nation and anywhere else. We will not stand for it. So I am, for one, are not trying to appease or make racists feel good or give them any comfort for their racism. When we see their words and we know what they're doing, we have the documents.
I agree with what Demario just said. I wanted to address something that Rhonda said a couple of minutes ago. And, and it's really, really important that Rhonda's family has been Creek. Okay, and all of you, your families lived as Creek. You were part of the Creek Nation. You were part of the Creek fabric. You grew up with the language, with the traditions, and it's part of your essence. It's part of your being, and that is what they denied you in 1979, and that's what needs to be reversed. I think that denial of citizenship, of nationality, of belonging, that's what's so offensive, because I think that who you are and your being is essential to your identity. I think that identity is critical to self-esteem. I think self-esteem is critical to mental health and well-being. And when you take that away from someone, when you take that away from a family, you've destroyed them. And so that's what needs to be reversed. Your families have been Creek for generations and generations and generations. For me, my identity is important. Okay, I didn't bring this up. I consider myself a member of the Hebrew tribe. Okay, and I am named for my great-grandfather, Yosef ben Avram Rotmanovich. And he was executed in 1948 for being a Jew, because the Nazi regime considered him an inferior race, and they executed him. And I was named for him. And I speak out for those who are discriminated against, because I wish someone spoke out for my great-grandfather and my relatives who were executed based on their identity. So I think that my identity is really important to me. I know how important it is to everyone else. I know how important it is to Demario and to Rhonda and to all of you, to Jordan and Jasmine and all of you. And that's what I think that this fight is about. It's about identity. And you can't take away people's identity. And when you try to, you need to be stopped dead in your tracks.
I would add to that, I completely agree with what you're saying. And that goes to the language that we're speaking and the terms that we're using. When we say Indian tribes and then use it interchangeably with nation, that's problematic, because there's a distinction between a nation and a tribe, depending on the definition. And when you have commingled those two terms with their distinct meanings, depending on who's talking, you run the risk of losing identity. And I think that's a problem. That's an issue that is coming up and must be addressed, because we're looking for solutions. We must look at both sides of the coin in order to come to that solution. So my solution would be is in our education and changing and controlling this narrative in a more positive direction, you're explaining how you can still be a tribe and also a nation. You can be a distinct tribe and also a nation with distinct rules for each. That's possible. When you're sovereign, you can do that. And if it's going to right a wrong, you should do it. Now, going back to the truth, my point about the truth and the point that Demario made about the Confederacy, we must take the whole truth into consideration. Okay? President Lincoln is quoted to have saying, "I am not, nor ever have been, in favor of bringing about in any way the social and political equality of the white and black races. I am not, nor ever have been, in favor of making voters or jurors of Negroes, nor of qualifying them to hold office, nor physical difference between the white and black races, which I believe will forever forbid the two races from living together on terms of social and political equality." Now, that is not taught in schools. Going back to Jordan's facts about what's being taught in the brainwashing, that's not taught in schools. We hear a whole different narrative about Abraham Lincoln, but this is what he said. And what political party was he a part of? We talk about the Confederacy, we talk about the South, the North and the South, but President Lincoln was a Republican. President Lincoln was on the North. So we must look at this from a bigger perspective and not get lost in these red herrings, so to speak. What is the overarching issue? There's always been a race issue in the United States. The Creeks have a race issue by default because of the United States. Doesn't make it right, doesn't make it wrong, but that is the case. And how do we confront those issues, taking the truth into consideration?
Rhonda, can I say something to that?
Cedric, how are you?
Doing all right? All right. Good. So I'm going to read this to you all. My background is I'm an enrolled member of the Mobile Band of Choctaw Indians. My reservation is located northwest of Mobile, Alabama, right on the Mississippi state line. My degrees are all in American Indian Studies and Law. In 1978, at the outset of the federal recognition process, Kiowa attorney Kurt Kickenberg was hired by the National Congress of American Indians to do a review of why tribes in the south and eastern parts of the United States were not recognized, many of them. These are his exact findings. And so this is the Did I get cut back off?
You're on. Sorry, that's me. You know, I'm learning. Sorry, go ahead.
So his findings, Kurt Kickenberg, who's a Kiowa attorney here in Oklahoma for the National Congress of American Indians at the time, he said, and this is the language of 1978, the reasons that are usually presented to withhold recognition from tribes are: one, that they are racially tainted with the blood of African tribesmen, or two, greed for newly recognized tribes will share in the appropriations for services given to the Bureau of Indian Affairs. The names of justice, mercy, sanity, common sense, fiscal responsibility, and rationality can be presented just as easily on the side of those advocating recognition. So I did a full research project on the over 20 tribes that are federally recognized in the south and eastern part of the United States, and the 29 cohesive, intact cultural tribes that are not recognized by the United States. All of the ones that were recognized at that time when I did this study 10 years ago, this is prior to the Virginia tribes who I assisted in their federal recognition process getting recognized, were people who are listed in documents as either being of Indian or mixed white and Indian heritage. All of the tribes that were not recognized at that time until the Mashpee Wampanoag were recognized and so forth in 2007, the Shinnecocks in 2011, were people that were described in historical documents as of mixed Black ancestry within their communities. So it's very, very clear. Lee Fleming, we have him on record. He's the head of the Office of Federal Acknowledgement, and we have him on record dismissing tribes that he feels are of mixed Black ancestry as being authentic tribes. So we all have, this is all stuff that we have. The oldest reservations in this country today are occupied by people who are considered Black Indians. The Unkachugs, for instance, on the Poospatuck Reservation on Long Island, who are still not recognized. Tribal communities such as the Nanticoke, the Hassaminaka Reservation as well, when you go into Massachusetts. The Mattaponi tribe in Virginia, who is not a part of the Congressional Act that recognized 6 of the tribes. They live on the nation's oldest reservation besides the Pamunkey. They are still not recognized. They've always been perceived to have some Black ancestry. My tribe has been attacked decades because of our supposed mixed Black ancestry. So it's very clear what the situation is. The Lumbees are not recognized. The Halawasa-Ponies are not recognized. The United Houma Nation in Louisiana are not recognized, despite my tribe and all of their tribes, including myself, generationally attending federal Indian boarding schools. And so, you know, we talk about the legalese, and I understand that. I have a legal studies degree in indigenous law from the University of Oklahoma College of Law. Professor Robertson was one of my professors. But it's what it is that innate reality that Indian country is run by people who are of minor Indian descent, primarily racially white, who control large corporate tribes. That is it. They control the Office of Federal Acknowledgement. If you look at the employees in the Office of Federal Acknowledgement, you will see that. It's the only reason why your petition is not moved forward. And what they use, and this is what I really have to end with. Jack Abramoff, they spent $15.3 million against our tribe's federal petition. The Porchbannock Creek Indians, the Muskogee Creek Nation, the Mississippi Band at that time, $15.3 million of documented funds. He served he's a lobbyist from Washington, D.C. He served 6 years in prison for being a lobbyist and doing that to our small community, right? And so in 2007, members of the Cherokee Nation charged me in federal court as an Indian, even though they're saying my tribe is not Indian. They charged me as an Indian and gave me a 6-month jail settlement for what they say is harassment, meaning that I write things that have been published by Duke University Press 2 weeks ago, published my newest writing, and it talks about that. My previous writing is called Jim Crow Feather in Indian Country. This newest writing has just come out in an anthology called Otherwise Worlds, and it talks to these issues even more. It was written 3 years ago and updated in December. And then 3 months ago, a white Cherokee citizen, when I was doing a presentation, now, have you know I'm a former full-time teacher and coach at Frederick Douglass High School, Oklahoma Centennial Northeast Academy on the northeast side of Oklahoma City. Okay, and I was raised in an all Black and Hispanic community. And so 3 months ago, I was presenting at Harding Charting Preparatory, and a white Cherokee citizen who doesn't like me, who teaches at that school, convinced 2 Black students to say that my presentation on racism and colorism is racist for talking about those issues. And I ended up on the front page of the New York Times and USA Today as a white man who's racist towards the Black community. And that was instigated by an individual when the Black community immediately stood up for me, but by then they're drowned out because Black voices can't be heard in this environment anymore. You can't hear people's voices no more. So from 2007 to this point, white enrolled citizens of federal tribes that have freedmen issues have consistently targeted people who stand up against what they say. And I've talked for too long on it, but please be careful as you go through this process. And please just call them out for what it is. And what better time to do it than right now with everything. My thing is, I don't care about reputation. Reputation's blowing the wind and through the internet. You can think anything you want of me based on what you read on an article in USA Today, or you can be someone of character and know who I am. And so I really hope that you guys are successful with this. I know the amount of money behind trying to stop you. I know the players involved in it, and I hope you keep pushing forward. Mado.
Thank you for that, Cedric. I'm going to go to another question because we do have quite a bit to get through before this call ends at 5:30. So one question that we'll pose is, if the Creek Nation refuses inclusion, what should be done? How does the Treaty of 1866 compare with the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the United States Constitution? Who would like to take that one?
Can I will. I teach constitutional law too. So, I want to answer. I'm doing this to you, Rhonda, a lot. I apologize. What should be done, because I don't see that as my job, but what can be done, right? What are the options for consideration? And so I guess I'm talking to you again, Demario, right? And so here's what occurs to me. So this is a little bit of law school stuff, but the Supreme Court has held, it was ages ago, in a case called Talton versus Mays, that the U.S. Constitution does not apply directly to tribal governments. So you can, and I know John Veely brought a 13th Amendment claim, and I know Demario has talked about it. That's unresolved, but maybe. So I guess that's one possibility, but I think 14th and 15th would be problematic. Congress in 1968, however, passed a statute called the Indian Civil Rights Act that took the language you care about from the 14th Amendment and applied it as a federal statute to the tribe. So the Equal Protection Clause is in that statute. Now, as Jim mentioned a while ago, Supreme Court in Santa Clara Pueblo said that the Indian Civil Rights Act doesn't create a private right of action, which is to say in federal court, which is to say you guys couldn't bring a federal lawsuit arguing that Muskogee Creek Nation had violated your equal protection rights. But that doesn't, you could bring a claim in tribal court, and I think it, as many have correctly said, I made the case for tribal judicial independence, and I have to do that because I'm a tribal court judge, but I've also, been doing this for a long time, and I get that in disenrollment cases in particular in certain tribes, it's hard to get what you consider to be objective justice, because especially when there's money involved or there's racism involved or something irrational. So, but the fact that you can't bring an Indian Civil Rights Act equal protection claim in federal court doesn't mean that nobody can, because the federal government can. If the tribe violates a federal statute, and the federal government can bring a claim in federal court accusing that tribe of violating the federal statute. Now, who would do that? The people to talk to would be the folks in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Tulsa and elsewhere. The U.S. Attorney is a former student of mine, and I'm sure he'd be happy to take your call and visit about the possibility of being sued. So that is available, at least theoretically. Would they do it? I don't know. It's their call, right? If they want to get into that and probably politics involved and all sorts of stuff, but just be aware that that is a theoretically available avenue. The other theoretically available avenue is the international one. And I want to kind of circle back around to that. While Jim is absolutely right that tribes are not member states in the UN system, no indigenous political community is, you can still use it as individuals. The entity that I would, in theory, again, I'm not giving any advice, right, just possibilities, look into it's a treaty body called the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. It's headquartered in Geneva. It's part of the human rights apparatus. They hear complaints from groups who believe they have been, and individuals who believe they have been discriminated against on the basis of race. Every country that's a signatory, and the US is a signatory to what's called the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, has to report every 4 years or so on their record of compliance with the obligations of the convention. And an argument could be made that in endorsing the 1979 Constitution and in continuing to disfranchise or dismiss from citizenship, it's bigger than disfranchise, Freedmen, Muskogee Creek Freedmen, the US has violated its obligations under the Convention for the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination. Now, would you get a hearing? Yes. In my experience, we have a clinic at the law school that files with the CERD routinely. Every time we file anything, they take it up, they ask questions of the state, and they work it into their report. This is an easy system to work. The procedure requirements are minimal. And, you know, if a lawyer on the call wanted to get any more information about the process, I'd be more than happy to talk to him. So as a public service, as a state employee of the state of Oklahoma at the law school, what do you get from the CERD, which is what we call the committee? What you will get is a list of findings of fact, and then you will get determinations as to whether those facts constitute a violation of the treaty requirements. And then you get recommendations for action that the state is required to reply to. And they've got 6 months or so to respond, and often it's by taking action. Often it may be by denying that there's a problem or something like that. But at a minimum, what you get if you present a case, and I've seen this happen 1,000 times. Well, let me give you an illustration. New Zealand, Maori argued that the state of New Zealand had violated the race discrimination treaty when they took away their foreshore rights. That's rights off the coast of New Zealand that they claimed they had under their treaty. New Zealand wasn't really interested in responding, so they went to the CERD and said, this is race discrimination. The CERD said, yeah, it is, and that's all they needed. Because what they had then back home was a front page news article in every newspaper in New Zealand. United Nations Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination says New Zealand government has violated international human rights laws. You only have to do that once a lot of the times, and people will sit up and talk to you and say, well, maybe we do need to do something here. And I will tell you, again, from having done this for a long time, stuff like that can be worth more than a decision from a local trial court, right? That's front page news all over the United States and elsewhere, as the New Zealand case was. So, so consider that, you know, just sort of a route that can be taken. Very few people use it because people don't know that it's there. And so, you know, sort of the educational component of this conversation, I want you to be aware that this is there and that it's a really, really easy to process to use. The last thing I'll say, and this is just talking legal stuff, but I think there's a bigger narrative here, and I want to go back to what several of you said about changing the narrative. I think we're at a historical moment of massive change and rewriting of history on the issue of race. I predict that it's going to spill into other areas as well. But it's like there is a global reckoning going on right now. And there is change on a scale and with a speed that I've never seen in my lifetime. And it's thrilling and terrifying and exciting and cause for hope and cause for fear. And all of that stuff is going on at the same time. I think that whether you want to or not, you are a part of this moment. And I think that now is the time, as others have said, to raise your voices and say, hey, us too. You see all that stuff that's going on out there? We're a part of that story too. And I think that will be expected, and I think it will cause people to sit up and take notice. And not just people, decision makers in tribal government, but people, tribal citizens, people in Oklahoma who don't know the story, who don't know the narrative. But it seems to me this is your moment to claim that story and to tell people that story from your side. I think that people are listening now. I think that white people are listening now. I think people want to be told the truth, and they want to hear it from you guys, right? Who have been living on sort of the downside of the story for so long. And your story is Muskogee Creek, but it's the same story as everywhere else, frankly. And so I, you know, and that's nothing certainly for me to do, or for a number of us who are on this call. It is you own it. You own this. And so I think that, you know, if I had to Like I'm giving missions to DeMario. I want him to call me and talk about all sorts of stuff, and any of the others.
I will. I'll look forward to it.
Yeah, okay. Well, it's always fun. It's always a pleasure. But for the rest of you, you know, I mean, I think it's now, and you're evidencing that you want to do this from just all the stuff that I've enjoyed listening to and learning from today. But I think it's your time to sit down and say, all right, let's do this. Let's just start talking and start educating people. I think it's great that somebody from Congressman Waters' office is on the call, because I think Congress can play an important role in this. Let me go back to something that Cedric said that occurred to me, and I'm gonna get in trouble with people for saying this, but I don't really care. It's one of the joys of tenure in a chair. Cedric mentioned a bunch of tribes that in the late 70s were denied federal recognition on the grounds that they had African American members or you know, some sort of racial mixture. Well, you know, that's a problem. You could try and work through the Interior Department recognition process, or you could get Congress to fix in an afternoon, right? Which would be the much faster way. You compile all of this stuff, Cedric, send it off to Congresswoman Waters' office. And, you know, I could see one statute, federal recognition statute, for all those tribes that were denied recognition solely because they had Black citizens. That's one statute. That's one afternoon, and you can clean up generations of, and the support for that, again, and I'm circling back to myself at the beginning, and I'll stop talking, is that tribes are political entities. They are not racial entities. And people have got to get out of thinking, people inside tribes, and I understand, you know, the need for anxiety about loss of cultural heritage and all of that stuff. But culture isn't the exclusive province of people of a particular race. And as many of you guys have said, you've been Creek forever. You are Creek culture. And so preservation of culture, it seems to me, based on this narrative, which I believe requires inclusion of the freedmen, doesn't it? So, you know, to the extent that that's the argument, it doesn't really make necessarily make a lot of sense to me. And all right, so that's as much as I'm going to say.
Anyone else have anything to add to the question?
Would you repeat the question one more time?
Yes. If the Creek Nation refuses inclusion, what should be done? 1, how does the Treaty of 1866 compare with the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the U.S. Constitution?
Well, let me just agree with Dr. Robertson while I have the opportunity to, and that is that when it really comes down to it, it's the change in public opinion of the people that's going to be the most influential and the most important, and so changing people's minds and getting their attention that now is the time to change this policy. It's going to come down to the Creek people, whether they're on the courts or they listen to the courts or they're paying attention to what's going on the streets. It's going to come down to the people in the end, because courts and governments are dragged along into the modern, into making progress when they're forced to by the people.
I think in answer to this question, I think it's imperative, and I'd be remiss not to bring this up. Having lived on a reservation most of my adult life and young early life, I have been intimately involved with the people. And it's important in our quest for recognition, our request for what is rightfully ours, that we don't do to others what has been done to us. And I say that in regards to respect. We must respect them as much as we want them to respect us. And we must not force a narrative on them. Narratives have been forced on all of us. we must not force a narrative on them. We must request that they accept a narrative and show them how that is beneficial to them, to all of us. Now, I'm all for holding them accountable for what's being done, but we must hold everyone accountable. We must hold the United States accountable. We must hold ourselves accountable, and we must hold the Creek Nation accountable. Okay, now, how do we respect them? You must understand, when you have an oppressed people, yes, we like to push this narrative that, okay, we made an agreement and these are the terms of this agreement and you need to follow this agreement. Let's deal with the truth. Was this a forced agreement? What was surrounding these treaties? Let's be truthful about it. If you're forced into a situation backed up against the wall, how are you going to respect that decision that you made? Deal with that issue and show them how we can incorporate our issues with their issues and come to a more positive results for everyone. Now, to specifically answer the question, what do we do if they don't? Well, we use multiple tools. For a big job, you need multiple tools. Demario, Rhonda, and some of you others that are on the line, you have done tremendous work. You have spent a lot of your money, sacrificed a lot of your personal time to this effort. And I think it's imperative that those of us who are talking, me included, that we put some blood and tears into this as well. And there's multiple ways of doing it and looking at it. I think I believe it was Dr. Robertson who was talking about the UN, multiple angles. Use the political angle. Use the media. Right individuals. Apply political pressure, and also provide services. What's stopping us from providing services to the Creek Nation as it is? Getting involved in the education system in the Creek Nation, providing a boost as an incentive. So there's multiple, there's a positive way of positive pressure, and there's also negative pressure. I think we can apply both, but pressure needs to be applied because we say we're free, right? We say we're free. When something is rightfully yours and you're free, do you ask for it or do you take it? When something is rightfully yours, when you're free, do you ask or do you take? Now, if you're a slave, your master must give you permission. If you are a slave, your master must give you permission. And this goes back to psychology of everybody involved. We've been told that we're free, but are we mentally free? Do we mentally have the mindset that this is rightfully ours? We have been wronged, and this is when we're. But I know things.
Well,
I know some of us do. Yeah.
Branton, I appreciate, man. But like you said, most of us have been fighting this fight for decades. So we don't have to answer the question if we're free. We know what the goal is. We know what we're trying to obtain. We know who the enemy is who's keeping it from us. And so we are going through all of the channels that you stated. We have federal legislation. We've met with people like Representative Danny Davis and had legislation introduced. We're working with experts like Dr. Diamond and Professor Robertson and Dr. Littlefield. We're writing letters. We're bringing litigation. We're having this conversation. So we're doing all of that, you know. But tomorrow, say if we're free or not. I mean, I don't know if that's who that's geared towards. But for me, it's just a little bit. I can't take hearing that too much longer because absolutely we're free and we're fighting for what is rightfully ours. And as Rhonda said, for her great grandmother who was 92 years old and was disenfranchised at the end of her life, you know, she's fighting for that woman. Rhonda, like she said, she doesn't need anything from the Creek Nation on a physical plane. But the reality is the Creek Nation wouldn't even been a entity as we know it today if it wasn't for the Black members of the nation, those enslaved and not enslaved. And that's a matter of historical fact. So I think we're doing all those things. But as far as providing service to the Creek Nation, our people has provided so much service to the Creek Nation as is some members who were enslaved. We don't owe the Creek Nation anything else, right? They owe us, and we're coming for what is owed to our people, that we have equity. This is not something that we're having a handout. We have equity in the Creek Nation. We have blood in the Creek Nation. We have tears and equity and sweat labor and money as judges, as enslaved people, as teachers, as light horsemen, et cetera, et cetera. So I just don't feel what you're saying about, are we free in our mind?
Let me clarify. Let me clarify.
Do you mind if I interject in there?
Well, let me clarify.
Kenneth, hold on.
Okay.
We're short on time. Go ahead.
Let me clarify. And once again, I apologize if that sounded disrespectful. And I was not speaking toward you specifically. I'm talking about us corporately. Have you been fighting alone?
No.
Well, I'm saying as far as are the numbers there? And I'm speaking to us as a group, as a whole. I'm speaking to myself. How much time and sacrifice have I put into it? I'm not talking about you. You've put the time in. You sacrificed. But have we all done our part? Have we done all we can? And I can adamantly say I haven't. You know? And so that's what I'm speaking towards. I'm not speaking towards the group that has been working. You have proven yourself, and your work is admirable, and I highly respect it. But what I'm saying, as corporately, as a people, every one of us that have a stake, have equity, as you eloquently put, have equity. Have we done our part? And that's all I'm speaking towards. And I do apologize if that sounded disrespectful. I'm not speaking about those that have put the blood, sweat, and tears in, like you, Rhonda, and all the others that are on this line. I'm just speaking in general for us as a whole. And I am also speaking to myself, and I am vocalizing it as a step in actions that will be taken in the future.
Cool.
We are really about to run out of time, but we want to talk about some of the things that we can contribute economically. And Branton, I know you had some good ideas. We've talked about some things, and DeMario as well. If we can talk about those things, and then DeMario can give kind of an update on where we are with our court case in the district court of the Muskogee Creek Nation, because we are running out of time.
Rhonda, that was someone that wanted to say something.
Oh, yeah. That was Kenneth Ford.
Hey, how's everybody? My name is Kenneth Ford. I'm from Kansas City. I'm a descendant of Harry and James Sales. And I'm also the founder and director of the Kansas City group, the Freedmen Alliance of Kansas City. And I am encouraged by all the different talents that I've heard today, all of the different inputs. It's exciting to me to hear that the Creek Freedmen are moving on in the direction that they are. Our mission is the elevation and the promotion of the Creek Freedmen culture and everything. And so it's just something that's, and we're heavy into trying to make people aware so that we can have more people on board. Almost every day I meet somebody from this area who's has the Creek ancestry or Choctaw or Cherokee ancestry, but they just don't know about it and don't know how to find out about it. And now I see so many different elements that can be done here with the legal elements, the people that have, all you guys that have been on the front line for so long. I appreciate you. And so our job, I feel like you're doing your job. Hopefully our job is to add to your base, the base of people behind you to support you and carry on what you've been doing. We're trying to learn how to tell our story, how to learn about our story, be able to tell this story. And then you just mentioning about economics. That's something we're really promoting here in Kansas City, is the economics. We're not waiting for somebody to validate our ancestors. We appreciate you guys that are on the front line that are fighting for that. But I'm not excited about waiting for somebody to validate my existence or the existence of my great grandparents. Harry and Jane Sells did what they did. They were, and so what we're trying to do is promote educational opportunities, economic opportunities, so that when we citizenship, we can come in, hit the ground running, and make more contribution to the tribes, as Kyle Tom and Ketch Barnett and all the other heroes from our past have done. And so there's so much more to do. I'm excited about what you're doing, what I'm hearing, and I'm on board with you at the city group.
And Kenneth, let me just interject you. You know that the educational piece that you're talking about, that's correct, because we've actually collaborated together. We came to Kansas City several years ago and spoke to your group and to
that's
educate
what I was just
them.
ready to say, that we
So you're
respond
absolutely
from you.
correct.
And also, I just penned a letter, an open letter to Sweet Creek. It's appeared in the Kansas City Call paper here. I sent a copy to the Tulsa World. I don't know if it ever made it, but it's speaking to what we're talking about today. It's called Speaking of Justice, come think of it. And so I can make that available to anyone who's interested. And I'm encouraged by, I think her name was Jordan, as far as people in the Creek Nation, and more free to start writing letters and doing things that can put the pressure.
Absolutely.
And as Mr. Grissom said, we can get positive pressure and negative pressure, but let's put the pressure on it, because this is as the attorney Lindsay mentioned, this is the time to make some good time to do it.
Absolutely.
So count me in.
We will. Thank you for that. Always good hearing from you, Kenneth.
Oh, good to be hearing from you.
All right.
Okay, Rhonda, you want me to talk just a little bit about where we are with the case?
Yes.
Okay, so we filed our petition in the Creek Court, and they filed an answer about 2 weeks ago. Of course, we've been slowed down with COVID-19. The court was not in session for several months, and so now we are in the process of putting forward some discoveries. I don't want to talk too specific about what our plans are, but just know we're trying to get through the tribal process, as the federal court stated. I was encouraged that the Creek Nation actually filed an answer and not an immediate motion to dismiss, meaning that this case I was told by the Creek Nation attorney, the assistant attorney general, that this is something they want to see their courts make a decision on. So that was encouraging, but even with that being stated, we're really trying to just get through that process as quickly as possible and get back into federal court, which we believe will be a more fair venue. But until that time, we will work hard in the Creek Nation court and put forth our best argument. It is clear that the Treaty of 1866 is still the law, the supreme law of the land. Article 2 has not been abrogated. It should apply to the Creek Nation, and all so-called Creek freedmen should be full first-class citizens with all rights, including the right to run for office, the right to vote, and the right to have be included on any particular benefits that any other Creek citizen receives.
Thank you for that. Branton?
I second everything that's been said. Once again, this is a great forum, and I am pledging my support. There's a lot that I need to learn about what's been done so far, and there's a lot I can do to benefit us as a whole. And one of the things that I think I will want to do is get the young people involved.
Yes.
I was really encouraged by some of the things that basically all the things that Jordan was saying. Time is out for accepting lies and living with narratives that we know are untrue. And like was stated before, this is unprecedented time where there's a reckoning that's going on. And this is a perfect time to start disseminating the truth. and more people find out, more people get involved, and some things are uncovered that people are not aware of, I think that will help move us in the right direction. I encourage, I advertised this meeting. I know that there's a few people on the line that I invited, and we welcome feedback from everybody that tuned in today. I'm sure this won't be the last time. We definitely respect the comments and the input from the tenured professor and the doctor that was on the line. This is awesome that they took time out of their busy schedule to provide input, and it is experienced input. This is knowledgeable input, and it will do well that we take it in consideration. And then once again, to tomorrow, respect you and appreciate all that you've done. I can only hope to achieve the level that you have obviously attained in your work and the things that you have done for all of us. And what I want, and I'll end with this, I don't want your work to be in vain. I don't want this to go any longer than it has. We've already spent too much time. You've already spent too much money. You've already sacrificed too much. What does it take to push this over the edge? And that's a question I'll be tackling, because God forbid any one of the original founding members go to their grave without this being resolved. God forbid. And I'll be thinking on it. I'm sure others will be thinking on it. And my goal is to push this over the edge. It's been brought to a certain point, and it's going to happen.
And we appreciate you, Branton. Branton is a very, very, very young man, and he's going places. And we just appreciate you, and we definitely want you to recruit other young people to join the fight. And I know that your great-great-great-grandfather, Cal Miko Tom, would be very proud of you. And so we appreciate all that you've said today.
Thank you.
Anyone else have anything to say as we close? I think we probably need to have another session, correct, on this, because we didn't even get through all of our questions. So much more.
I just want to say real quickly, Rhonda and Sharon and Jeff, thank you so much for putting this together. You guys have been doing such a fantastic job for such a long time. We would not be where we are if it wasn't for your leadership, your sacrifice on this issue. And I appreciate you. I love you guys. And thank you for allowing me to be a part.
Absolutely. We love you too. You know that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I really appreciated meeting everyone, and also want to congratulate Demario and Rhonda and Sharon and Jeff and Branton for putting this together, and thanks again for including me.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Dr. Robertson? I think you're on mute.
There we go. I just wanted, you know how many thousands of hours I've spent on Zoom, and I'm still hunting for buttons. Yeah, no, I agree with everything Ron and everybody said. I think you guys are the best, and I think it's you know, all of you. There's so much work that's gone into this for so many years, and I can speak to that from experience, because I don't even remember when the first time was that you all contacted me and said, hey, let's, you know, can you come and talk? This is important. And it educated me at the time. And you should know that I teach all my students about all this stuff. So this is a part of the Indian law curriculum at OU, and it's an important part.
We certainly enjoy having your students come to our conferences and different meetings that we've had over the years. So always welcome.
Absolutely. I appreciate you saying that.
Absolutely. Okay, any of the other speakers have any final words? I know some had to leave. All right.
Hey, Jeff Kennedy speaking. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Great. Hey, I just want to thank each and every one for participating in our first ever virtual somewhat town meeting. I appreciate each and every one of you. I know the time is going to run out, so I'm just going to say thank you and hope to see you all soon. Stay safe. Special thanks to Rhonda Grayson, though. Thumbs up, everybody, for Rhonda Grayson for putting on a fabulous, fabulous production.
It's a team effort, always a team effort.
Absolutely.
It's always we.
Taking the lead on it.
All right. Thank you all for joining. We appreciate all of you. And we'll be working on our second call. Thank you.